500,000 unpaid carers aren't claiming the benefit they're entitled to, many because they're scared of DWP penalties should they break the rules on earnings. Our unelected Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced more bad news for the poorest and neediest in society, a Tory review on benefits.
But just as it would be wrong to dismiss this growing trend, so it would be wrong to merely sit back and accept it, because it's too hard, too controversial, or for fear of causing offence.
Yes, in an all too familiar cart before horse scenario, Sunak revealed how he's thinking of axing personal independence payments to people with long-term mental health troubles, payments worth £950 a month. Why? Well, for Sunak and DWP Secretary Mel Stride, neither of whom are medically qualified in any way, people with long-term mental health problems are just struggling with the everyday challenges and worries of life. Really? Because as someone who's struggled for the last 5 years with PTSD, I find the suggestion people are off sick because they're a little bit down, frankly, profoundly insulting and ignorant. And I didn't even claim the benefit. I struggled to work. I struggled to get up in the morning, frankly. I couldn't sleep all night. We scraped by on my savings. But if I hadn't had savings, I would have needed help. I'd have needed benefit. And one thing no one's arguing about, though, is there is a rise in people going off long-term sick. The number of folk economically inactive due to health reasons has risen from, I think it was 2 million or thereabouts before the pandemic to 2.8 million today, while more than 10% of people in their 20s and early 30s say they are disabled because of mental health. Now, experts, they point the finger at mental health conditions on everything from the trauma of the pandemic, social media use amongst children, and underfunded mental health provision. Endlessly confusing and contradictory messages from government, I would suggest, don't help either. But while Sunak and co are kind of mustard keen to get these poor people back to the grind by essentially starving them into submission, by axing their benefit, if that's the direction they go in, the last 14 years of Tory government has seen next to no action in addressing our failing physical and mental health, or fixing the hospitals, the medics, and the institutions that are supposed to be there to protect us. So while he was quite right, Sunak, to say yesterday that some people with mental health conditions may be better served by treatment than cash payments, he ignored the fact that access to treatment has never been so hard thanks to relentless cuts, which in turn further negatively impacted people's health. This is a catch-22. The Care Quality Commission flagged this up the other day. With the latest figures on community mental health services showed that nearly half of people waiting for treatment had found their mental health had further deteriorated during that time. The longer you wait, the worse you get. Now, a PM said government would look at whether more medical evidence about conditions should be provided before a PIP claim is accepted. But at the same time, his plan is to remove doctors and other medically qualified types from making medical judgments. And instead, the plan seems to be replacing them with God knows who. I don't know, Centrica staff who've been on a 2-day training course in Hendon, incentivised to strike as many people off benefits as possible. It's interesting too, and I've already seen some of the comments that were from some of the comments that have already been in existence about this issue. And it's like, how can we afford the budget? How can we afford to look after so many sick people? And this was the starting point for Sunak's sort of crocodilian concern for the long-term sick, was the spiralling disability welfare bill, currently I think £69 billion. But I had a look online before I came on air. And the UK is, we spend around a third less on, compared to many European countries, around a third less on social protection benefits as a proportion of GDP. I think we're under 20%. France is just over 30%. So the idea we can't afford to look after the sick, I struggle with that. I really do. 0345 6060 973 is the number. I accept the system isn't perfect, but I am deeply concerned about the direction our Prime Minister wants to take this conversation. Love to hear your thoughts. Before that, though, Tony Wilson is a director for the Institute for Employment Studies and joins me with his thoughts this Saturday morning. Good day to you, Tony.
Oh, good morning, Matthew. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. What's your overarching view to Sunak's announcements yesterday?
I was nodding along as you were talking introduction, Matthew. I felt a bit sad about it all, to be honest, really, because I think we do have a really significant challenge and issue here around how we can better support people with long-term health conditions to get back into work where they want and are able to work, and also to help people be well in work. Work is incredibly protective of our health. It keeps us well, and most people are actually happy in their relatively happy in their jobs most of the time. So most of this work is good for our health. So I was sad though, mainly because actually the government are doing quite a lot on this agenda actually around employment support for people out of work with long-term health conditions. And some of the things they're talking about, in principle, aren't bad ideas around reforming how we assess people for benefit, around improving access to employment support through fit notes. But the narrative and the really kind of ugly language being used and the toxicity of it, I think becomes really counterproductive, because actually if you've got a long-term health condition, as you were setting out at the start, the last place you're going to go for help will be a job centre if you're constantly being told that you're shirking and that you shouldn't be on benefit. And if people are being pushed away from support, how do we reach them and how do we engage them effectively? So I was disappointed by that. And also, I was talking yesterday that just some of the stuff they were saying was just wrong as well. I mean, we don't have a sick note culture. We've got very low rates of.
You see, this is interesting, because I didn't look specifically into that. So you're saying that we don't have that culture in the first place?
No, not at all. The English disease is too many people coming to work when they're sick, not people staying off work because they're not sick. So we've got about the lowest sickness absence rates in the OECD, and part of the reason for that, a large part of the reason for that, is because our protections when you're sick are so poor. You know, statutory sick pay is incredibly low. You don't get it for the first few days of sickness. It's relatively easy for employers to take action against you if they wanted to, if you had extended periods of sickness absence. And also, a lot of people come to work when they're poorly because they don't want to let their colleagues down, their customers or their patients down if it's in health services. So we've seen a slight increase in sickness absence since 2020, but that's not a surprise. I mean, most of the growth is people staying off when they've got respiratory conditions, when they've had COVID-19. It's people realising now it's better not to coming to work when you're feeling poorly and you should be staying at home.
I'm glad you mentioned COVID, because I narrowly escaped a long COVID diagnosis. Right. I was just short of 3 months, but I learned quite a lot about long COVID along the way. Right. And one of the things I was aware of is government was just not interested in long COVID as a discussion, as a condition, as something that they would have to grapple with. And yet here we are with the Prime Minister seemingly mystified by the 800,000 extra people that have become economically inactive since the pandemic.
Oh, and undoubtedly long COVID is part of that. It actually started growing in 2019, that this growth in long-term mental health and people out of work due to long-term mental health. There's lots of things going on here. Part of it is poorer mental health, unfortunately. Part of it is our population's getting older, and you're more likely to get ill as you're into your sort of 50s. I think long COVID is a part as well, and kind of energy limiting conditions that can really affect your ability to work and stay in work. So yeah, these are all contributing, and we're not really doing enough at helping people who are already out of work to get back in, and that's my sort of big concern.
Likewise, I mean, I hope I made that clear in the introduction, that there's no point saying to people, you could be better off having treatment and therapy to help you back into the workplace, but then you find out you can't get access to the treatment and therapy, so you're being squeezed at both ends. Just before I let you go, Tony, I mean, I suppose the most alarming thing from Sunak's narrative, to my ears anyway, was that people in their 20s and early 30s are going off in significant numbers with mental health concerns. I know you're looking at it mainly from an employment basis, but why are so many people in their 20s and early 30s struggling, do you think, to keep in work and balance mental health issues?
Well, I think nobody knows the answer to this, and it is an area we've looked at as well. I don't think any of us know. I think that some of the factors you set out are definitely part of that. I think people feel a lot more insecurity now than they did previously about their housing situation, about whether they'll get a job, whether they get the right job. People feel have the sort of always on culture. I mean, I'm a parent of kids as well, and that pressure through video games and smartphones and things, and the pressure people feel under, and the pressure we put, the parents and peers put them under too. All these things undoubtedly are contributing. Some of it is greater awareness of health as well, and that's positive, by the way. I mean, it's this idea that this makes people snowflakes is the exact opposite of the truth. For example, greater diagnosis of things like autism or neurospectrum or neurodiversity. It's incredibly important because you have a lot of people who aren't being diagnosed are more likely to then develop more significant mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, and so on. So there's a lot of things going on there. But can I just make one final point? Here too, work is really protective of health. We did a big study looking at a survey of young people. Nearly half of young people said their mental health was a barrier to getting good work. But for young people in work, more than 2/3 of young people said their work had been protective of their health, it had been good for their well-being. So yes, we can see health as a problem, but work is often part of the solution. Not always, but it's often part of the solution.
Fascinating conversation. Tony Wilson, I'm indebted to you getting up this early on a Saturday morning to share those thoughts. Dr. Sarah Hughes, Chief Executive of Mind, the mental health charity, has been listening to all of that. Good morning to you, Dr. Sarah.
Good morning.
No problem, thank you.
Your introduction. I think we're at risk of violent agreement here on this panel, and Tony was great. Look, I was horrified. I think that it marked a moment in the story of where we've got to on mental health in a way that has undone quite a lot of the progress that we've made over the last decade. The language used, the tone, the approach. Now, I agree with Tony. Good work is great for people's mental health. But this idea that we've got a sick note culture isn't borne out by the evidence. It's part of a war of words. This is an election year, and I know that we're trying to find party lines, but let's not have mental health as one of the fronts on this culture war narrative.
The Shadow Health Secretary said. Why do you, I mean, there's a part of me that as soon as I was aware he was going to make this address, it was teased up on the Thursday night, I thought, here we go, it's the same old Tory sort of call to their base. We're going to go after people on benefits. We're going to go after people on benefits. But as you say, that in order to do it, he has stigmatised people on benefits. I mean, the idea that everybody on receiving PIP payments is struggling with the worries of life. I can't tell you. I mean, I'm just absolutely fizzing with rage about it because I just feel it's a personal attack on me. And it's been the most horrific experience of my life, even worse for my family and friends, I should imagine. And here he is saying, oh, you're just struggling with life. Life's worries. Get over it.
Gosh, wouldn't it wonderful if it was just that simple? I mean, look, and thank you so much for sharing that, because it's absolutely true. And in fact, to get to PIP payment, you have to be incredibly poorly. This idea that people who are feeling slightly bluesy, I think a word was used at some point, is just nonsense. And indeed, you're more likely to, not get the access to the benefit the first or second time you apply for it. You'll have to go through an appeal. You'll very likely receive it at that point because people will assess you and go, actually, they are really poorly. They do need this payment. And so it feels to me that we're picking on a group of people that haven't got any skin in this game. And it feels like we've got a whole approach to thinking about these benefits that's basically going to marginalise. It's going to cause more harm than good. Now, we absolutely have been arguing for a long time around welfare reform. We agree that we need to ask questions about, process, access, all of that. We absolutely agree. But let's start to tackle the reasons why people are becoming so poorly. We can't keep blaming people for the systemic failures that are having an impact on their lives.
From Mind, thank you for giving up your time this Saturday morning. I was noting how similar it is to Rwanda, this government. So the world views Rwanda as an unsafe place. Rishi Sunak says, no, it isn't. We can have a vote in Parliament. We'll declare it safe. And here we have doctors declaring people mentally ill and unfit for work. And Rishi Sunak says, we get rid of the doctors, get some chap in from Centrica, and he can say you're fine. It's so frustrating. Anyway, I'll be coming to your calls on this very shortly.